Hi, young travelers. Welcome to the second episode of the Histories of Aliusterre. My name is Ethan, and in today's episode, we're going to be covering the second creation point in the Aliusterre timeline. When I say the second creation point, I mean the second. It's almost as if the world became anew after this event. If you remember from last episode, the introduction one, we covered the first creation point, the story of the abyss being conquered by the All-Being and his wife Elo Maria, the birth of Elo Maria, and how that caused the world to be created. So today we're going to understand how the world came to be after the fall of the Continental Three. The Continental Three are the first three children of the All-Being. As of right now, they don't have names. They're literally just called the Continental Three, and part of the reason for this is the era of these three great nations. They all are lost to history because of an event we're going to get into called the Great Wind. Now, these three continents, they form the basis of how people lived in these separate continents. Like, the people of Sor are different from Jor and Thrail, and those people are going to act differently, and whenever the Great Wind comes, they're going to also respond differently as well, and that leads to the creations of the nation of Amarin, the kingdom of Ireland, Mahan. All of these nations formed from the remnants of the Continental Three nations. They have to rebuild. They have to create new places. Now, the way this came about is, I remember thinking, maybe this will add some uniqueness to the world rather than just having like, oh, the All-Being and Elo Maria created the entire world and then all the nations started the pop. I kind of didn't want to go that approach. I wanted there to be a second barrier to overcome within creation itself. And so with that, let's dive into the actual reading of the Continental Three. The Continental Three. The Continental Three were the first developed and organized nations of Aliusterre. Each one was bound to the first three of the All-Being's children, who were given one of the three continents to let their people rule. These nations were primarily theologically based, with their gods having a more established leadership role with their people. They were the guides for the people to believe in the All-Being. For years there was peace, and the nations took over most of the lands their continents provided them. Now, while these nations lasted for years, it was mostly during the decades before their demise when they started to advance technologically. This is because the gods were preparing for what would be known as the War of the Seas. Before, the three were peaceful, and hadn't seen horrors since the first few survival years. They didn't have armies and lived off the gift the All-Being gave them. However, the three gods began to become jealous and increasingly paranoid about the other's land. The wise tell us that Jor and Sor argued over who would control the isle we know as Antalira, and Thrail was concerned with the larger amounts of land the other two had compared to them. Soon the gods began to ask their people to worship them, and promise them glory and power if they defeat the others. So the people began to view them as their true gods, and the War of the Seas began. After years of massive conflict, which saw fleets upon fleets of ships invading the continents, the nations began to collapse under the weight of the war, and the All-Being could not bear it. He had watched his sons kill one another in a war that should not have started, and now his creation believed they were without guidance or faith. The All-Being stirred a massive wind in all of Aliusterre, and he scattered the broken peoples of Jor, Sor, and Thrail. When they arose, no memory of the All-Being came to them, and some started to see visions and other such events about the All-Being's new children. The All-Being decreed that any man, woman, or child who believed in him shall be saved. Thus, the era of the Continental Three ceased to exist, and the era of the child nations was born. The birth of a god is the rise of a nation, and the fall of a nation is the death of a god. This is the real first example of the gods being tied to their nations. It comes from the Continental Three. Up until that point, before the War of the Seas, which it's named after, it's called the War of the Seas because it's before Norden is in the middle of what is known as the Great Sea, and so the continents are pretty spread out, except for Jor and Sor. They were relatively close to each other. Thalassa, actually Thrail, was more remote compared to the other two continents, and as we read, that's why they had a little bit of jealousy, because the other two continents had more land mass than them, respectfully. So they began to send fleets of ships and invade each other throughout the Great Sea, and there was great naval conflict as well. When it says he had watched his sons kill one another in a war that should not have started, that is the symbolism of the gods fighting each other. The War of the Seas is that symbolism. The gods are fighting each other while simultaneously their nations are also fighting each other, and it's a direct parallel. The gods end up killing themselves, and thus the nations fall. The All-Being sacrifices the idea of him in the minds of men. He erases his own presence in their minds so that they could worship his children in order to be saved. And when the scattered people arose, they see the visions of his new children, and then they form nations around the theology that is created around them as well. When Amarid first came to be in existence, they created a religion surrounding the god Amel, and Amel will be a key figure in the founding of Norden itself. This is all to say how I wanted to have religious diversity. I wanted there to be diversity, but all related back to one key event. The War of the Seas and the Continental Three is the birth of the religions within Aliusterre, and I honestly thought the concept was cool that a god was bound to a people and a people bound to a god, without them really realizing it. Mentioned early in the previous episode, an Elkin would be shamed upon by an Icorian for their religious customs, even though they both believe a child of the All-Being and they'll be saved. That's the kind of irony to it all. There is a footnote. I would think the war lasts around 20 years. The build-up lasts around 40 to 50. The peaceful years last around 150 to 200, and the survival years last 10-ish years, with the fallout and the beginning of the new era starting right after the win during the final year of the war. For around the last 3 to 4 years of the war, it was like a brutal dark age for Aliusterre. So that is how religion and the birth of the nations come to Aliusterre, the remains of the Continental Three and the War of the Seas. And with that, I hope you enjoyed, and the next episode we'll be talking about the foundational point of how Norden came to be. And I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.